Welcome to the NegotiateHer podcast. I'm Gitanjali Ponnappa, and I will be hosting the podcast with Apa Gupta. This podcast has been a year in the making. Last summer, 2023, was a series of anniversaries for me. It was the anniversary of being in consulting for 25 years. It did feel like an achievement. It was also the anniversary of having 10 years in a Big Four. I was a partner. It also was an anniversary of a birthday, let's put it that way. We have birthdays every year. And all of that coming together in the summer of 2023 made me think about what would I like to do in the next decade of my life. And then I got to thinking, why do I want to think about the next decade of my life? And I realized that there were a few key things that happened in the past year that served as a trigger, and that it would serve me well to address those triggers. I read a book called Designing Your Life, and the very first question was, what is your relationship to work? And I had to think deeply about, what does work do for me besides pay my bills and stroke my ego? And I'll share the answer with you in another episode, but it was pivotal to my thinking. Over the years, I had a suspicion that I wasn't being paid as much as my colleagues. And that suspicion was because we were hiring new people with the same experience as me, but they were getting paid more than me. And I wondered, that seems very unfair and not right and almost borderline unethical. And then at the end of the year, I actually got what was called a 40% bonus. But when I look at those numbers and I realize what that was, it wasn't a bonus, it was a correction. It was fixing something that was wrong. And that is where we are today with Negotiate Her as a podcast. Very many women and people of color like myself have had this experience where you know something is wrong, you know you're being underpaid or treated unfairly, but then you lack the data, the skills, the tools, the mindset to go tackle that. And that is what I hope to do with Apa, to unpack how we can have a clear purpose about our careers, how we can get power from acknowledging things like imposter syndrome, and what are the very pragmatic tips we can take from each other and our life lessons to apply into our careers. I am Indian. I was born in India. I grew up in India. I studied in India. And then I would like to say, the gift of being able to live and work in several parts of the world. I've lived in the US. I've lived in South Africa. I now live in Switzerland. I have done work out of Singapore and Australia. And I like to think that the breadth of these countries, these cultures, have helped me push in, lean in to understanding my own culture as a strength and as a bias when I go into my career discussions and the way that I live my work life. Apa asked me, why would you like to do this podcast with me? Actually, I'd like Apa to tell you why she would like to do this podcast with me.
Hi, Gitanjali. It's really nice to be here with you. And to answer that question that you just posed, the main thing is that my year last year was also a year of many firsts.
Mm-hmm.
I had recently become a mom. I started working shortly after. I mean, Americans wouldn't say it shortly because it was 1 year after, but for me, it's really. Um, and I had to grapple with new identities. I had to reevaluate my relationship with work, as well as how these new priorities, such as my beautiful boy, came into the picture. And
Okay.
I was joining the job thinking, it would go smoothly because it was an area that I already knew. But I found myself the transition just didn't go as planned.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I found myself in not a really nice, I would say almost toxic work situation that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of unnecessary emotions to come to the surface, and a lot of mental turmoil. And I think you did know that, because I did call you asking for support, that I didn't really know how to navigate some of these situations,
Mm-hmm.
especially when emotions are at play, to get the best deal for myself. And I found myself, asking that even though I had the education, I had family support, I felt held back. And I didn't feel that I had the courage to deal with a lot of the things that was happening around me. And I felt frustrated because usually, as you know me, I'm quite a confident person, and I do take risks and I do go out and put myself out there. So when I did call you and I was asking for advice and some tools, because what I was dealing with is no new situation. There are lots of people that deal with this, and probably it's not a big situation when you like compare it with others, but to me it was very real, and I didn't know how to negotiate my way out of it. So, when I think this kind of just happened because you were starting your company, which was about negotiations. And given that we have quite a lot in common, I thought, this would be also a really great opportunity to explore our dynamic.
I'm glad that you reached out. Also, but now that I asked you to introduce yourself, I feel a little bit bad because I can hear the emotion in your voice about that toxic situation. I can I can hear the pain that it caused you, and in some sense, I would like to think that my objective of requesting you to be on this podcast with me is to bridge some of those things that you discussed. One, about the fact that we're both women. Does that change the way we negotiate? Does that bring a certain emotionality into the kind of career decisions we make? And you as a mother. The other thing that we have in common is race. We're both not white men.
No.
We're both from India, and we both work as minorities in our work environment. Is there a dynamic there that we didn't know was at play and maybe is psychologically holding us back? Or maybe it isn't. Could it be a strength? That's
Mhm.
another aspect that I'd like us to explore. And then the last one really is about age. We do have a 20-year age gap, maybe even actually a little bit more, since now I know actually how old you are. So I think that generational difference, because are you a millennial, by the way?
I am a millennial.
Yeah, see, there we go. I'm like, I used to joke and call myself borderline millennial because I have some of those behaviors, but I'm not. But I think the concept of gender, race, age are things that I would like us to unpack and explore in our series as a podcast together. So
Hmm.
shall I start with the first one then? Shall we talk about gender?
Let's do it.
Okay. So there's a statistic that I want to share with you. As preparation for this podcast, I did my homework, and there is a study by the Harvard Kennedy School that found that 57% of men negotiate their initial job offers. So I'm thinking, that's pretty good. That's 1 in 2 men that is negotiating their job offers. So now here's a little quiz for you. What do you think is the percentage of women who negotiate their job offers?
I would say, when was the study done?
Does that make that much of a difference? Now I feel like put on the spot. Let's go with, I'm totally making this up, 1993. I'm saying it with confidence, but I could be so wrong.
So, if it was done at that time, I would say less than 10%. I can't believe that it would be more than that.
Okay, so that's almost accurate because it's 7%. And while you were doing that, I looked it up. Oh my God, that study was from last year,
What?
2023.
Oh no.
So 7% of women are negotiating the first job offer that they receive. So that's 1 in 10 women, and in terms of men, it's 5 out of 10 men, right? So when I try and compute that in mathematical terms, it does make sense that we have a pay gap based on gender. If women aren't even negotiating, that very first step in their career is getting that job offer. That to me is proving the point that there is a gender difference. I always thought, no, there are confident women and we negotiate. Well, clearly, the macro data shows that there is a difference.
Let me let me put you in on a secret. It's not so much of a secret if we're going to be talking about it on a podcast, but I actually have not negotiated my salaries either.
Okay.
I asked for something, they told me they can't give it to me, and they gave me, something which was okay, and which I accepted, but I never really pushed for the salary that I actually thought I deserved.
Okay, I'm going to show you some love. And
Yeah,
instead of being shocked
say it.
and appalled and saddened, I'm going to show you love. And I'm going to tell you the next time,
Of
not
course.
just a job offer, even a change of team, even a change of client, a transition into another country, any of that is an opportunity to communicate, to share, to negotiate. So I'm gonna keep this in mind for you. When that happens, we're still going to talk about it. But here's another thing that I think is very telling is 20 years later, you are still not negotiating. And when I say still, I didn't even know that I should negotiate. And I'm hoping that you at least know and you chose not to. So maybe your son is going to negotiate because he knows that he should and he has the skills to do it.
Yeah, I think the awareness is a huge part of it, because I don't even know the extent to which I can negotiate. So the
Yeah.
thing, I knew I could negotiate, so I asked for a certain amount. They said no, so I said, okay, can I have a little bit more of this? And they
Mhm.
said, and I didn't push. I didn't come
Yeah.
with preparation and be like, no, this is the reason why I want it. If I knew more, I mean, we've had some conversations around this podcast around negotiation, which we will get to. I would approach this very differently today.
I feel like we should stop the podcast now. We've already convinced Apa. That's great. So here's another thing that I have to tell you. I find negotiating, and I don't know if this is the Indian in me because when I was in India, I never did this, so I can't say that. But maybe it is subliminal in my cultural psyche. I find negotiating so much fun because I take everything as an opportunity to learn and to ask a question. And so for me, negotiating is a default. I literally never take whatever's offered in the first place because I think it's fun to see what else could this person give me or what else can I give them that makes this relationship a better, wholesome relationship. How can I offer something that shifts the power balance? So it's now hardwired in my brain from years of practicing it that every interaction is an opportunity to make that relationship bigger, better, more whole.
That's so funny that you say this, because you're almost describing negotiation as not aggressive, as
Yeah.
because normally when you think of negotiation, when you think about it, right, we were talking about Chris Voss as well. When you're looking at a hostage negotiation, you're looking at it coming from a very male dominated, aggressive style of negotiation. Maybe not aggressive, but you still have those, I have those connotations with the words negotiation. But when I think of the way you're speaking about it, I'm like, I have those skills. I do those things in other areas. So it's almost as if I could use the skills that I have to my benefit. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely, yes. And you're right. It is not about, oh, okay. I want to frame it in a positive way.
Yeah.
It is about giving energy into a conversation, and it isn't about combat. It's a conversation. And you mentioned Chris Voss. He is leading in the world in terms of his contribution to research as well as his pragmatic practice of negotiation.
Absolutely.
I feel very strongly about making a point here. And the point that I would like to make is there is distinctly, I believe, and then there is research that backs it up, men negotiate different from women. And I think that's because of the power dynamic. If I had another PhD left in me, I might go and do that research to do that. But I do believe that there is a power dynamic, one of men, so a man to not a man. Second, a white man to not a white man. There's that dynamic as well, which is a privilege. And I'm sure people like Chris Voss acknowledge the
Well,
privilege.
they
They
do.
know what that means, and they use it with kindness in their negotiation.
Absolutely.
The point I'd like to make is you and I were not in a hostage setting. You and I are not in the FBI. You and I are not in the business of saving lives. In fact, if I may stretch it a little bit, in some cases, maybe we feel like we are the hostage. We're
Mm-hmm.
not the negotiator. We are the pawn in the middle. And I'm aiming for this podcast to be where we flip that mindset of not being the pawn, not being the hostage, but taking charge of simply a conversation.
Absolutely. I think you put it so beautifully because I do sometimes feel like a pawn. I'm not going to lie. I do.
Yeah.
And the thing with women, I think when they come into the negotiation table, I feel sometimes we are already at a disadvantage, especially for Indian women or women of color, because when we break the stereotypes of how people, expect us to behave, there is a social penalty that is associated with that. And negotiation, if it is an aggressive form of negotiation, puts us,
Mm-hmm.
puts us exactly in that setting because we
Yes.
usually aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
You don't expect Indian women to be very aggressive because we work. We're not working in India. Of course, there
Yeah.
are aggressive women in India. We're not
Yeah.
working. We're working in another country where people have perceptions of how Indian women should behave.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of a, I don't want to call it a gender norm, but I'm going to call it a gender and ethnic norm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can work in our favor, and we can be perceived in a very positive way, or because of the stereotype we could be victims of that stereotype. There's a wonderful book that I have just started reading, so I can't say very much about it. I've just started reading. It's by Linda Babcock, and the book is Women Don't Ask: Negotiation and the Gender Divide. And the reason I got this book, the name of this book, was I was having a coffee conversation with a person who works for the Negotiations Institute, and Anna Coyote, wonderful, smart, bright, negotiator herself. And I put forward my mini hypotheses about power and the dynamic and gender and the privilege of color to her. And she sent me a wonderful reading list of women who are now leading negotiations and the literature on women as lead negotiators. And when you said Chris Voss, there's a person on his team called Sandy Hine. I had to look her up.
Mm-hmm.
Sandy, the leading members of his team,
Wow.
and she brings a perspective. I don't think they position it as the female perspective. I don't think they do. But I think she brings a perspective that is distinctly not male.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I'm manifesting, Sandy. Maybe in episode 100, we will have this.
Yes, so there is we as Indian women, we as women, whether there's an ethnic element or not, we are touting those norms by asking. And therefore, I think it's good to switch in our brain that we're not fighting. This is not meant to be aggressive. This is just a conversation. So anybody can have the conversation, irrespective of which gender you are or which ethnicity you are. Just go have a conversation. There's no limitation to being able to have a conversation.
Yeah, because when I think a lot of the time when we think of women negotiating, we have this image of these mean girls, fighting over something, bitch fights, right? This is not that.
No, not at all. I would want to propose, in a way,
Just 1 minute.
that this.
Hear this sound coming from the background. I'm just going to close the window because it's really annoying me and I don't know if it's going to catch it.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So, on the topic of gender, UC Davis reports that women who negotiate are seen as violating gender norms, and they face social penalties for doing so. So, your image of the mean girls it is actually validated
Mm-hmm.
by research that if we negotiate, we are seen as mean girls and we are violating that gender norm. The point that I would like for you and me to hold on to, and then for our listeners to take away, is if you're violating that gender norm, so be it. In many episodes, we will talk about how you can do that in an authentic way. But the point I want you to take away is if you do not negotiate, it has financial penalties and it is going to catch up with you over the years, which is why the cumulative macro global data shows that we have a gender pay gap. It's
Mm-hmm.
because we also need to take responsibility for stepping into a conversation slash negotiation.
Absolutely. And I think one crucial point is that if you don't start practicing, you will
Mhm,
miss that experience because
mhm,
men have a lot more experience exercising power in social settings, in
mhm,
life than women do. It's changing, but we
mhm.
start practicing, otherwise, we will not catch up with that experience.
Correct. Practice. We have an episode planned for you that is on preparation, which includes practice. Okay, Appa, let's transition to the second aspect. So the first one was gender, the
Mm-hmm.
second was race. So you and I, we're going to discuss color. So let's call it race, but ultimately we're talking about color here, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily politically correct to say, but let's just say it. Okay, I'm Indian, you're Indian. We both live and work in Europe. We both have friends and family all over the world living in different countries and working. So we have anecdotal personal experience with how race plays out in a negotiation. I will say that I shouldn't call it research. I did some quick Googling, poking in, asking AI to help me, Gen AI to help me with this. And there isn't actually that much data research around how race slash color plays into a negotiation unless you're looking at two very specific areas, which is the US, where there is research on Hispanics, on Black Americans, and if you're looking at the UK, where it's not so much race and color as it is religion. So
Mm-hmm.
there is data and research done on Islam, for example, in the UK and the role of that in the employment market.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go forward into our discussion with for mainland Europe. Gitanjali, so if other people have found research, absolutely put that in the comments and let's talk about it so we can frame this better. So let's go anecdotally with the fact that the stereotype exists for women. There's a further layer of stereotype that exists, which is for women of color.
Mm-hmm.
There's a stereotype that exists for people of color, so men as well, that we don't negotiate.
Yep.
And
I touched on that briefly in my previous comment.
mhm,
We are not taught to negotiate, and it's
mhm,
something, at least as an Indian, I would be seen as, I don't know, I can't even think of the right word, but as not nice, as you said. If I kept asking too many questions and I tried to get the best of myself, it would be like, "Ah," like, why is she like that? And if a boy was like that, it would be curious, or, he's so naughty but cheeky. So I can think of examples where it hasn't been perceived very well.
mhm, mhm. Um, let's. I would like to give you an example that I have struggled with for about 2 years now. It had a very big impact on my choice actually to even set up Negotiate Her. You want to hear the story?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Do otherwise.
A couple years back, I was in the middle of a contract negotiation, just to size it, let's say about 10 million, company to company contract, so business to business contract. And we were working with a procurement team. And I have to represent not just me as an individual, obviously, but me as a representative of the company that I work with, me as a representative of the team that I am, speaking on behalf of. We've done a lot of prep. For our numbers, we had our, give and our get, and we will talk about Batna and Zopa later as well. But we had done all of, let's say, called the technical homework. I was at the point where I now needed to do some homework on, let's call them stakeholders. These are people at play. And so I called a colleague of mine and I said, hey, do you know this guy? He's the head of procurement. Do you know him? Can you give me a little bit of context? And this person, the head of procurement, for the sake of my story, I'm going to say that he was from the Indian subcontinent. And my colleague, for the sake of our story, I have to be clear and I have to tell you that he was not from the Indian subcontinent. He was a guy from Europe. And he told me, oh, this guy, he's a carpet salesman. And I immediately pulled back from the conversation because in my brain, within an instant, I thought, if you're calling first a client, second, someone you know is very clearly sort of kind of from the same area as I am, and you are calling this person a carpet salesman, what are you calling me when you talk about me to others? Right? That was my first reaction. So he continued to tell me, oh, this guy really likes to bargain. So you better plan that into your numbers, in your commercial space, remember to give, something for him. So he knows that he can show a big deal, so on and so forth. All of that was quite helpful. But what stuck with me, because I struggled with it for days afterwards, was what could have made that conversation actually more constructive? What could have made that conversation less insulting but more helpful? What would I have said if someone had called me and said, hey, can you tell me I'm negotiating with Apa? What should I keep in mind? I really forced myself into this guy's shoes to say, if I were him, what would I have said?
And I mean, can I just say one thing? Because for me as well, just looking at it in that way, I think it's because maybe he was haggling, right? That's the reason why he was being called a carpet salesman. It's
Yeah.
funny. I see that as a really great skill, so I would be he's so thrifty that, he's able to find a deal, and be careful of what you say, because when if you say it in a way, he can find a deal where you didn't expect one. So I find it as a positive thing, but I do understand. I mean, I don't understand. No, that's completely wrong. I don't understand why negative language has to be used.
Okay, so I already really love this conversation because I hadn't even thought of that this is actually a positive characteristic. That being said, this colleague did not mean it as a positive characteristic. He did mean it as a negative one. But
Of
you
course.
given me some ammunition, actually. I love this. This is a really wonderful way to talk about characteristics. We talk about traits in an episode later. We talk about the big 5 personality traits. I think we should also very much talk about, and we will later, about values and traits as positives and negatives, and not to just treat them in one bucket, that this is all positive or all negative, that every trait comes with its shades and nuances. Thank you for that, Apa. Very helpful. So let me tell you what I ended up with. So here's, if I were standing in the shoes, in these very uncomfortable leather shoes of my white colleague, here's how I would have said this. I'm thinking, right? So I would have said, now that you've given me the words, hey, isn't that a really cool thing that this guy really knows how to find a deal? I would have said, he's really very creative in how he comes up with the commercial package. I would have said that he's very persistent to get the best offer for his firm. I would have framed all of this in a way that was constructive for the other person. Because when you tell me something like he's going to find the best deal for his firm, it allows me to frame things as what could be a best deal for both firms. When you tell me that this person is persistent, I plan mentally that this is going to be a longer negotiation versus a shorter negotiation. When you tell me something like this person is creative, that allows me to be innovative in my options that I bring to the table. I don't have to bring just one traditional option and a second plan B kind of thing. I could actually be innovative. Now that becomes constructive. visioning of another person when you're doing a stakeholder assessment.
I understand. I understand. It's often hard because here we're talking about race, we're talking about perceptions, we're talking about how people have been raised and their perceptions of other cultures, their experiences with other cultures. Um, it's a difficult one.
Yeah. And I want for us to acknowledge that just like we spoke about gender, that race and this cultural background, in a way, plays such a crucial role in a negotiation, and that it varies greatly across cultures. What you see as positive, somebody else saw not as positive. So,
Hmm.
and like in India, we say generically and stereotypically, we say building relationships and trust takes precedence over an efficient communication.
Absolutely. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So when you're in a negotiation, for example, in India, even with me, for example, I would prefer if you first try to build at least some relationship with me before coming.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a bit difficult actually because I'm trained in Germany. So when it comes to work, I can be very efficient, but I find myself in these two buckets where I would prefer a relationship to be built first before an ask is placed of me.
Yeah.
Whereas I do understand in many work settings, you go in with the ask.
So, in a summary, in a way, of this discussion, which is tricky about color, race, ethnicity, is just simply let's acknowledge that it does play a role in a negotiation. Just like gender plays a role, so does this. Let's talk about the third aspect, which is about age. So there's two sides to this age thing, as everything has two sides. But in this particular, so I'm 20 years older than you, and I'm at the point where I'm beginning to slowly experience ageism.
Mm-hmm.
And ageism in the sense that there is research that shows that women, when they hit 50, I am paraphrasing now, are considered old, whereas men, when they are between 50 and 55, are considered leadership material,
Of course.
right? So ageism kicks in. But let's talk about it in the context of negotiation. I have a very, very not happy example and a very personal one to share with you. This also is one that I have thought about for about 3 years, but whether I should articulate it or not. And then I said, come on now, let's be hashtag bold and do it. So I was working with this group of people, this team. We were growing, so we were hiring people. And because I was in the leadership team, I began to notice that the people that we were hiring were about ish the same age as me, about ish the same experience as me, and they were getting paid way more than me. And when I poked and prodded and did a little research and tore open the box to look into it, I was shocked that I was paid 40% less than everybody else. And it took me not even half a minute to know that that was wrong. It took me not even half a minute to say, what the heck? And I immediately got into solution mode. Like, okay, what are we going to do about this? This is not okay. What are we going to do about it? So I went through the process of formally having a conversation, like formally requesting a review. I got a sponsor, a champion, a person who really thought this was unfair as well, who was in a leadership position that could actually do something about it. I gently but softly, because I didn't want the stereotype penalty to be held against me, I got support and I made a teeny amount of noise. And I say teeny because the louder you are, the penalty gets bigger for you. And I didn't want the penalty. In fact, I wanted that to be fixed. So I found a quite gentle way to have other people champion my cause. And 2 years later, that was fixed. Now, the reason I bring that up is so 2 years, and let's imagine that it's only two because I noticed it, but it must have been 10. I was 40% paid less, direct financial impact to my pension plan, direct financial impact at a very silly level, to the type of car that I could buy, or direct financial impact to the extravagance of the kind of vacation I could take, direct financial impact on how fast I could pay off my mortgage, as an example, if it was only 2 years. But extrapolate that over a career. Extrapolate that if that starts with you, Apa, at the stage that you are, and you don't catch it, and you go 20 years like I have, that is a direct financial impact.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you're saying it, I mean, I'm appalled, to be honest, because of all the partners that I have worked with, you've been one of the most not only efficient, but I would say inspiring, and all those traits that you look for in a leader. And to think about some other leaders,
Yeah, sure.
it is sad, because you do realize that unless you're negotiating for yourself, your value is not recognized. Nobody recognizes your value just because by just doing
Yes.
more, you're not going to get more. And
Yeah.
you're talking about age. I mean, you're on the other side. Maybe you're facing ageism. For me, I'm not even taken seriously. That's
Mhm.
have this bubbly, sometimes childlike personality. And because of it, I'm actually penalized on the other side, because
Mhm.
people don't take me very seriously sometimes when I say things. And when I have these two sides of me. So when I'm like cheery, bubbly, friendly, and then when I change into my focused, let's go mode, people struggle. It's like cognitive dissonance for them. And I have the opposite penalty. So
Mhm.
sometimes I've realized, especially because I'm constantly negotiating with people older than me, I'm not really negotiating that much with people younger than me. It almost it almost serves me to play the good child,
Yes.
you know, and it's because I have noticed that actually helps my cause sometimes more with men than with women, to be the one who understands, and I don't know how to say this without
Accommodating.
accommodating, and like looking at things from different perspectives and being like, I really thought about it, have you thought about it like this, you know being I can't think of a better word than child, because I do sometimes feel like the power dynamic is of an older person, uh,
Mhm.
coaching and you know, explaining things to me, and I'm like, yes, yes, I have never thought of it like that. But it is a hard one, because sometimes it feels morally wrong, but at the same time, no, it serves my purpose. So if that means that I will get what I want to a certain extent, I have to do it. But of course, there's always a boundary, and there's a
So,
line.
our months of interaction and years of conversations, and I hope going forward as well, I would like to add in a layer, which is I hope you will find a way with authenticity.
Yes,
All I'd like for us to do is acknowledge that gender, race, age in all ways creates a power dynamic that affects negotiation. Now, we each has the choice to use those three in an authentic way to get what we want, or in a devious way to get what we want. I advocate for authentic because it's a much nicer, cleaner, happier, bubblier way to live life. But you could also do it in a devious way, which, sure, if that's your thing, okay.
yeah,
I would want you to know that when we talk and we work together, that all we want to do is acknowledge that it's at play. And then we have a choice. We can choose what we do once we know something is at play.
absolutely. And the thing that I'm exactly the same as you, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. For me, authenticity is the most important, and which is why sometimes I recognize if I'm getting that icky feeling, I'm like, am I doing it correctly or not? And that's the whole point. The fact that not only do each of them have a relationship with negotiation, think about it, all of it together has a complete, when coupled together, has an even more magnified effect on how you negotiate and your outcomes as well.
As we bring this episode to a close, I have a hope, I have a wish and an aspiration for your generation, which is simply that your generation will know, will acknowledge, will be aware that there is a dynamic at play that is not as obvious as you would think. When you negotiate, when you converse, when you are trying to get something for something in that conversation, that race and age and gender has something to do with it. So, all I wish for you and your generation is an awareness, which many in our generation did not even know, that our color, the fact that I'm brown, and the fact that I'm a woman, and the fact that I'm almost 50, is playing into a negotiation. I wish for you to have that awareness.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Even if we would like it to be different, that's just the truth.
Exactly. Early in my career, I, like many women and people of color, felt unprepared for negotiation. I actually didn't even know I should negotiate, really. Very, very naive. That experience and this continued lived experience, and having had 25 years in management consulting, has fueled this passion that I have really to empower others. And that's why I founded NegotiateHer.
This episode explored the significant gender gap in negotiation. We also talked about how cultural backgrounds can influence negotiation styles, as does maturity and age. I hope we can inspire you to negotiate your next salary, unlike me. That's a wrap for this episode of Negotiate Her. If you like this episode, share it forward and help us all rise together.
Your voice matters. Stand up for yourself. And when you can, stand up for someone else too.